They thought I was asleep. They thought I wouldn't understand. But what I heard that night stole my trust forever. The night I learned the truth began like every other night of my life, quiet, obedient, and trusting. I was 67 years old, sitting in the living room of the house I had lived in for 4 decades, folding laundry that did not belong to me anymore. The television murmured to itself, a language I no longer followed, and the clock on the wall ticked with the patience of something that had watched me waste time my entire life. I had trusted that clock once. I had trusted the walls, the roof, the people sleeping in the rooms around me. That night, all of it betrayed me. I did not know yet that my life, as I understood it, had already ended. Trust is a strange thing. It is not loud. It does not announce itself. It settles into your bones slowly, like cold in winter, until you don't remember what warmth felt like. I trusted my family because that was what I was taught to do. From the day I learned to walk, I learned to believe. Believe your parents know best. Believe your husband is your shelter. Believe your children will be your future. Believe silence is strength. Believe endurance is love. Believe sacrifice will be returned. No one ever told me that trust, when unearned, becomes a weapon. My name is Salma. I am 72 now. When I tell people my age, they smile politely, the way people do when they see an old woman as harmless, finished, already folded into history. They don't see the years stacked inside me, heavy with swallowed words and unanswered questions. They don't know that for most of my life, I mistook survival for loyalty. I was born into a family that believed obedience was virtue and questioning was sin. My mother taught me how to lower my eyes before she taught me how to read. My father taught me that love was proven by endurance, not affection. When I cried as a child, I was told to be grateful. When I asked why, I was told not to ask at all. So I grew up grateful. Grateful for food, even when it was cold. Grateful for shelter, even when it felt like a cage. Grateful for attention, even when it hurt. At 19, I married a man chosen by my family. They said he was good. They said he was stable. They said love would come later. Love did not come. Responsibility did. Expectation did. Silence did. My husband was not cruel in ways that leave marks. He was cruel in ways that disappear into routine. He decided everything, and I learned to agree before he finished speaking. That was called harmony. When children came, I poured myself into them completely. I told myself that if I gave enough, if I loved enough, if I disappeared enough, something beautiful would grow where I had emptied myself. Mothers are praised for this kind of disappearance. No one warns them that when the children grow, there may be nothing left to return to. Years passed like pages no one reread. My husband aged into distance. My children aged into authority. I aged into usefulness. I cooked. I cleaned. I waited. I listened more than I spoke. I trusted without asking for proof. When my husband died, people told me I was strong. What they meant was that I did not collapse loudly enough to inconvenience them. I grieved alone because that was how I had lived. After his death, my children moved into roles I had never expected. They spoke over me. They made decisions without me. They reassured me with smiles that felt rehearsed. "Don't worry, Ami," they said. "We will take care of everything." I believed them. The house was still in my name, but the life inside it was no longer mine. Rooms were rearranged without asking. Objects disappeared. Conversations stopped when I entered. I noticed these things but explained them away. I had spent a lifetime explaining things away. It was my greatest skill. The night everything broke was my eldest son's birthday. The house was full of people, laughter spilling into corners that had long forgotten joy. I cooked all day, my body aching, my hands burning, because that was still how I showed love. They thanked me quickly, distractedly. I told myself that was enough. After dinner, I felt tired and excused myself early. I went to my room, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed. My chest felt tight, not with pain, but with something like warning. I lay down fully clothed and closed my eyes. Sleep did not come. Sometime after midnight, I woke to voices. At first, I thought I was dreaming. The voices were familiar, comfortable, careless. They came from the living room. I recognized my son's laugh, my daughter-in-law's sharp tone, my youngest daughter's voice soft, but firm in a way she had never been with me. I did not mean to listen, but then I heard my name. My name spoken without reverence is a sound you never forget. She doesn't need to know, my son said. It will just upset her. Exactly, my daughter-in-law replied. At her age, what difference does it make? My heart began to pound, loud enough that I feared they would hear it through the walls. She trusts us, my daughter said quietly. She always has. That sentence broke something open inside me. Trust. They said it like a tool, like a weakness, like something to be used. We'll handle the papers next week, my son continued. Once it's done, there's no going back. What about the house? Someone asked. The house is already decided. I sat up in bed, my body cold, my mouth dry. Papers. House. Decided. I had trusted my family with everything. My money. My home. My name. My silence. And now, in the careless comfort of night, they were dividing my life as if I were already gone. I stood up slowly, every joint screaming, and opened my bedroom door. The hallway light was off, but the living room glowed warmly. They were all there, leaning close, relaxed, unafraid. They did not see me at first. I was invisible again, as I had been for years. Until I spoke. What are you talking about? The room froze. They turned toward me, faces rearranging themselves into surprise, guilt, annoyance, concern. So many expressions, practiced too late. "Ami," my son said quickly, standing up. "You should be sleeping." I asked a question, I said. My voice did not sound like mine. It sounded older, sharper, awake. Silence stretched. My daughter-in-law sighed, just slightly, the way someone does when a child interrupts an adult conversation. "We were just discussing future arrangements," she said. "For whom?" I asked. They looked at each other. "For you," my daughter said. I laughed then, a short, broken sound that shocked even me. "You are discussing my life," I said. "Without me?" My son stepped closer, his tone gentle, controlling. "Emmy, it's for your own good." Those words. I had lived inside them my entire life. "For my own good," I repeated. "And what is that good?" No one answered. That was the moment the truth arrived. Not as a scream, not as a slap, but as a quiet, devastating clarity. I saw them as they were, not as I had raised them to appear. I saw that my obedience had taught them entitlement. My silence had taught them dismissal. My trust had taught them how to lie without shaking. I walked back to my room without another word. No one followed me. That night, I did not sleep. I sat on the bed until morning, replaying every moment of my life where I had chosen trust over truth. I realized something brutal and freeing at the same time. I had trusted my family my whole life. They had never trusted me at all. And for the first time in 70 years, I understood that survival was not the same as living. This was only the beginning. Morning arrived without mercy. The sun rose the same way it always had, spilling light through the curtains as if nothing inside the house had shattered. I sat on the edge of my bed, still dressed in the clothes from the night before, my body stiff, my eyes burning from a sleepless darkness that had nothing to do with night. For the first time in my life, I was not tired from work or age. I was tired from understanding. Understanding is heavier than ignorance. Ignorance lets you sleep. I listened to the house wake up. Footsteps, cups clinking, low voices pretending nothing had happened. That was the part that hurt the most, not the betrayal itself, but how ordinary it sounded to them. Like betrayal was just another household chore. I walked into the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. My face looked the same, wrinkled and tired, but my eyes were different. There was something sharp behind them now. Something alert. I touched my cheek with trembling fingers and whispered, "You are still here." For most of my life, I had lived as if my presence was optional. That morning, I decided it was not. When I entered the kitchen, the conversation stopped. They all looked at me, my son, my daughter-in-law, each wearing a version of concern that felt like an insult. The table was set. Breakfast was ready. Food prepared by hands that did not respect the person who would eat it. "Ammy, sit," my son said. "You didn't sleep." "I slept enough," I replied. I poured myself tea and sat down slowly. My hands shook, but I did not hide them. I had hidden enough things in my life. "We need to talk," I said. My daughter-in-law glanced at my son. He nodded slightly. "Of course," he said. "But you shouldn't stress yourself." There it was again, that gentle dismissal disguised as care. "I heard everything last night," I said. The air changed. My daughter's face went pale. My daughter-in-law stiffened. My son looked angry, not ashamed. Angry that I had overheard. Angry that I had crossed an invisible boundary by being awake in my own house. "You misunderstood," he said quickly. "No," I replied. For the first time in my life, I understood perfectly. Silence followed, thick and uncomfortable. "You were planning things," I continued. "Papers, decisions, my house, my life. Without me. We were trying to protect you," my daughter said, tears already forming. "You're old, Ami. You don't need these worries." I smiled sadly. "I have carried worries longer than you have been alive." My daughter-in-law crossed her arms. "With respect," she said, "someone has to think practical." "Practical for whom?" I asked. No one answered. That was when I realized they were not going to confess. They were not going to apologize. They believed they were right. My lifetime of obedience had taught them that I would accept whatever they decided eventually. They thought this was just another moment I would swallow. They were wrong. "I want to see the papers," I said. My son frowned. "What papers?" "The ones you said you would handle next week." "You don't need to worry about legal things," he replied. "They're complicated." "I am not complicated," I said quietly. "I am alive." That sentence landed harder than I expected. My daughter looked away. My son sighed heavily. "Ummi," he said, "you should trust us." I laughed then. A real laugh this time, bitter and clear. "I trusted you my whole life." Something shifted in me as I said it. The trust finally broke free, falling apart like old fabric. I felt pain, yes, but also relief. You cannot heal what you refuse to see. "I am going to a lawyer today," I said. The reaction was immediate. "What?" my son snapped. "Why would you do that?" "Because," I said, standing up. "This is my life." My daughter-in-law's voice sharpened. "You're being dramatic." "No," I said calmly. "I'm being late." That afternoon, I walked out of the house alone for the first time without asking where I was going. My legs felt weak, my heart uncertain. But each step felt like a small rebellion against a lifetime of submission. The lawyer's office smelled like paper and coffee. The young receptionist looked surprised when I said I needed help reviewing property documents. "You came alone?" she asked. "Yes," I replied. I lived alone long before today. The lawyer listened carefully as I explained everything. He did not interrupt. He did not patronize. When I finished, he looked at me with something I had not seen in years: respect. "The house is in your name," he said. "Nothing can be done without your consent." My chest tightened. "Then why did they talk like it was already decided?" He paused. "Because they assumed you wouldn't fight." The truth hurt, but it also empowered me. That evening, I returned home with copies of documents and a spine I did not know I possessed. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I went to my room and locked the door, not out of fear, but out of choice. Over the next weeks, the atmosphere changed. Conversations became sharp. Kindness disappeared completely. I was accused of being ungrateful, paranoid, selfish. The words cut deep because they came from mouths I had kissed as babies. One night, my daughter finally exploded. "You're tearing this family apart," she cried. I looked at her, really looked at her and said, "No, I'm just refusing to be torn apart quietly." That was when I understood the cruelest lesson of all. Families often love the version of you that serves them. When you stop serving, they call it betrayal. I began to remember things I had ignored for decades. Moments when my opinions were dismissed. Decisions made over my head. Money handled without explanation. I saw the pattern clearly now. My life had been managed, not shared. One afternoon, while sorting through old boxes in my room, I found a diary I had kept in my 30s. I barely recognized the woman who had written in it, full of questions, small hopes, unfinished dreams. I sat on the floor and cried for her, not because she suffered, but because she had believed suffering was all she deserved. That night, I made a decision that frightened me more than marriage ever had. I would leave. Not forever. Not dramatically, but deliberately. I began to plan quietly, the way I always had, but this time, for myself. I did not tell them. For the first time, my silence was not obedience. It was preparation. Leaving does not always mean walking out with bags. Sometimes it begins with standing still long enough to realize you no longer belong where you are. I stayed in that house for weeks after my decision, moving through rooms like a guest who had overstayed her welcome, watching the people I once lived for become strangers who spoke carefully around me, as if I were a fragile object that might break and cause inconvenience. They did not ask where I went during the day. They did not ask what I was thinking. They assumed, as they always had, that my life existed in the spaces between their plans. That assumption became my shield. I started waking up early again, but not to cook. I woke up to walk. The morning air felt different when no one was waiting for you to return. I walked until my legs burned and my thoughts softened. I passed streets I had never noticed, shops I had never entered, people who did not know my history and therefore did not define me by it. In those hours, I was not a mother, not a widow, not a burden. I was simply a woman moving forward. With every walk, memories surfaced, not the dramatic ones people expect. No screaming fights or broken bones, but the quieter wounds. The way my opinions were always postponed. The way my exhaustion was never enough to stop the demands. The way my kindness had been used as proof that I could endure more. I understood now that abuse does not always raise its voice. Sometimes it smiles and calls itself family. One afternoon, I returned home earlier than usual and heard raised voices from the living room. I paused in the hallway unseen once again. "She's becoming a problem," my daughter-in-law said. "This lawyer thing, what if she tells someone?" "She won't," my son replied. "She's not like that. Not like that." As if courage were a personality flaw. "We need to move faster," she continued. "She's unpredictable now." Unpredictable. That word landed heavily. All my life I had been praised for being predictable, reliable, easy to manage. Now, the moment I showed awareness, I became dangerous. I stepped into the room. "I can hear you," I said calmly. They jumped, startled, guilty, irritated. "You shouldn't eavesdrop," my daughter-in-law snapped. "This is my house," I replied. "There is nowhere here I am not allowed to exist." The argument that followed was not loud, but it was revealing. They spoke of inconvenience, reputation, practicality. Not once did anyone speak of my feelings. Not once did anyone apologize. I realized then that apologies were not coming. Not because they were incapable of love, but because they did not believe they were wrong. That night, I packed a small bag. I did not take much, a few clothes, my documents, the diary. I left behind jewelry I had never worn, gifts given out of obligation, furniture chosen by others. I was not running away. I was choosing what to carry forward. I left a note on the table. Not angry, not dramatic, just honest. "I need time to live as myself. Do not look for me. I will return when I am ready." I walked out before dawn, the sky still undecided between night and day. My heart pounded like a frightened animal, but beneath the fear was something unfamiliar excitement. Freedom is terrifying when you have been trained to fear it. I stayed with a distant cousin at first, a woman my age who lived alone and asked no questions. She understood without explanation. Some women don't need stories. They recognize each other by the way silence sits comfortably between them. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. I found a small room to rent near a park. It was modest, quiet, mine. For the first time, every object in my space had been chosen by me. I cooked when I wanted, slept when I was tired, spoke when I had something to say, and slowly, painfully, the grief arrived. Not just grief for what had happened, but for what never had. The marriage that was never loving, the motherhood that demanded erasure, the trust that had been misplaced for decades. I cried often, without shame. Healing is not graceful. It is messy and exhausting and lonely. One evening, my youngest daughter came to see me. She looked smaller without the authority of the family around her. "They're angry," she said. "They say you abandoned us." I nodded. "And how do you feel?" She hesitated, confused. "That's honest," I said. "Confusion is better than lies." She asked me why I left. I told her the truth, not softened, not sharpened, just true. She listened quietly, tears slipping down her face. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I know," I replied. "That's part of the problem." When she left, I felt something close to peace. Not resolution, not forgiveness, just clarity. I began volunteering at a local center for older women. I listened to stories that sounded too familiar. Women who had given everything and been forgotten. Women who thought it was too late to change. I told them it wasn't. I was living proof. One afternoon, as I sat alone watching the sunset from my small window, I realized something profound. The night my family revealed the truth did not destroy my life. It gave it back to me. But the hardest truth was still waiting, one that would force me to confront not just my family, but myself. And it was closer than I thought. The hardest truth did not arrive like a storm. It arrived quietly, like most things that change you forever. It came not from my children, not from lawyers or arguments or raised voices, but from the silence that followed my leaving. Weeks passed, then months, and slowly, painfully, I realized something I had never allowed myself to think before. They were not worried about me. They were inconvenienced by my absence. At first, I told myself they needed time. That shock takes different shapes. That love, buried under pride and fear, would eventually surface. I waited for messages that never came. I checked my phone more often than I should have, my heart lifting foolishly at every vibration, only to sink again when it was a wrong number or a reminder I had set for myself. No one asked if I was safe. No one asked if I was lonely. No one asked if I was eating properly. They asked my cousin instead when I would return, as if I were furniture that had been temporarily misplaced. That realization cracked something open inside me. Not anger would have been easier. What I felt was grief, so deep it settled into my bones. Grief for the years I had given without condition. Grief for the version of myself that believed love was proven by endurance. Grief for the woman who thought being needed was the same as being valued. I began to replay my life with a clarity that felt cruel but necessary. I saw patterns I had ignored for decades. Every time I had been tired, there had been no room for my exhaustion. Every time I had needed comfort, there had been a task waiting instead. Every time I had spoken about my fears, someone had reminded me to be grateful. Grateful women do not complain. Grateful mothers do not leave. Grateful wives do not question. I had lived my entire life as a lesson for others, never as a person for myself. One morning, while walking through the park near my rented room, I sat on a bench and watched younger women pass by. Some walked alone, headphones in, faces relaxed. Some walked with children, distracted but laughing. I wondered how many of them would grow old believing they had to disappear to be loved. I wondered who would warn them if I did not. That thought stayed with me. At the Women's Center, I began speaking more. Not giving advice, just telling the truth. I told them what it costs to stay silent too long. I told them how loyalty can become a cage when it is not mutual. I told them that family is not proven by blood alone, but by respect. One woman, younger than me but already tired in the same way, asked, "Do you regret leaving?" I thought carefully before answering. "I regret waiting so long," I said. That night, I dreamed of my mother. She stood in the doorway of my childhood home, watching me quietly. She did not scold me. She did not praise me. She only looked tired. When I woke up, I understood something that shook me deeply. My mother had lived and died the same way I almost did, and I had been teaching that life to my daughter without realizing it. The thought terrified me. I reached out to my youngest daughter again. This time, I did not explain myself. I did not defend my choices. I simply asked her to listen. We talked for hours about her marriage, her fears, the pressure she felt to keep everyone happy. I recognized myself in her words like a reflection I wanted to protect. "You don't have to disappear," I told her. "Not for anyone." She cried then, openly. The way I never had in front of my children. In that moment, I understood that leaving had not broken the family completely. It had cracked it open just enough for truth to enter. But truth is dangerous. A week later, my eldest son came to see me. Not angry, calm, controlled. That frightened me more than shouting ever could. "You're embarrassing us," he said after sitting down. "People are talking." I waited. "You've made everyone uncomfortable," he continued. "This independence, these stories, you're changing the way people look at our family." I nodded slowly. "And how do they look at you?" He did not answer. "What you want," he said finally, "is not reasonable at your age." That sentence burned. "What I want," I replied, "is dignity." It's strange how unreasonable that sounds to people who have always had it. He stood up, frustrated. "You're acting like a victim?" "No," I said quietly. "I'm acting like a survivor who finally stopped pretending." When he left, I did not cry. I felt something else instead, acceptance. The kind that does not beg for understanding. The kind that stops expecting people to become who they never intended to be. That night, I sat alone and asked myself the hardest question of my life. Why had I trusted them so completely? The answer hurt more than any betrayal, because I had never trusted myself. I had handed my authority to others because I had been taught I was not capable of holding it. I had accepted less because I believed asking for more was selfish. I had stayed silent because silence had kept me safe once long ago, when I was young and powerless. But I was not powerless anymore. Age had taken many things from me: youth, speed, certainty. But it had given me one gift I could no longer ignore. Nothing left to lose. I began writing my story, not as a complaint, not as revenge, but as truth. Page after page, I wrote about the cost of being the good woman. I wrote about the loneliness hidden inside obedience. I wrote about how love should not require erasure. As I wrote, I realized something else. The night my family revealed the truth did not just expose them. It exposed me. It showed me how deeply I had participated in my own disappearance. And once you see that, you cannot unsee it. The final lesson was coming. The one that would decide what I did with the rest of my life. And this time, I would not look away. There is a moment in every long life when reflection stops being gentle and becomes unavoidable. It is the moment when memory no longer asks permission. It arrives without warning, sits beside you, and begins to speak in a voice that sounds uncomfortably like your own. For me, that moment came one quiet evening, months after I had left the house that once defined me, when I realized that the truth I still feared most was not about my family at all. It was about myself. I had spent weeks writing, filling notebooks with words I never allowed myself to say out loud. I wrote about obedience and silence, about gratitude used as a leash, about love measured in endurance rather than care. Writing gave shape to pain, but it also exposed something deeper. Something I had avoided even while accusing others. I had stayed. Not because I was trapped, not because I was powerless, but because I believed staying made me worthy. That realization shook me more than betrayal ever had. I had learned early that good women are rewarded for patience, that suffering, if done quietly, earns respect, that a woman who asks for more risks losing everything. Those lessons had wrapped themselves so tightly around my identity that I mistook them for truth. My family did not invent that belief, they inherited it from me. Understanding that did not absolve them. But it freed me from seeing myself only as a victim. It returned my agency, late but intact. One morning, I woke with a sense of urgency I could not explain. My body felt heavy, but my mind was clear. I dressed carefully, not out of habit, but intention. I wanted to see my old house again. Not to return, but to confront the version of myself I had left behind. When I arrived, the door opened slowly. My daughter stood there, surprised. For a moment, we simply looked at each other. She looked older than I remembered. So did I. I didn't come to argue, I said gently. I came to speak. She stepped aside. The house felt smaller, louder, less like home. I sat in the living room where my life had once been discussed as if I were absent. This time I spoke first. I trusted you because I taught you that my needs came last, I said. That is on me. But what you chose to do with that trust, that is on you. They listened. Some defensively, some uncomfortably. No one interrupted. I am not asking for apologies, I continued. I am not asking for permission. I am telling you that I am done living as a role. I will not disappear again to make you comfortable. My son looked at me, truly looked, perhaps for the first time. What do you want? He asked. The answer surprised even me. I want honesty, I said, even if it's late, even if it's ugly. Silence followed. Then my daughter spoke, quietly. We didn't think you would ever leave. I know, I replied. That was the problem. That conversation did not heal us. Healing is not a single moment. But it shifted something important. The truth was no longer hidden. The power dynamic had changed. I left that house lighter, not because things were resolved, but because they were real. In the months that followed, my life settled into a rhythm that felt unfamiliar but right. I continued volunteering. I continued writing. I made friends who knew nothing about my past and therefore did not define me by it. I learned to enjoy my own company without guilt. One afternoon, a young woman at the center asked me, "Do you believe family is everything?" I thought for a long time. Family is important, I said. But it is not permission to erase yourself. That sentence stayed with me. As my 73rd birthday approached, my children gathered, not out of obligation, but curiosity. They did not bring speeches or excuses. They brought questions. Painful ones. Necessary ones. We spoke honestly, sometimes clumsily, sometimes with tears. It was not reconciliation in the way stories promise, but it was growth. And growth, I learned, is sometimes the only closure we get. Now, as I sit by my window again, older but no longer invisible, I think about trust. I think about how easily it can be misplaced when you do not believe you deserve better. I think about the night that revealed the truth, not just about my family, but about me. That night did not end my life. It began the part where I finally showed up. If there is one lesson I leave behind, it is this. Love that requires your silence is not love. Trust that costs you your voice is not trust. And it is never too late to choose yourself. I trusted my family my whole life. But the night revealed the truth. I learned to trust myself. And that made all the difference.